So I did a silly thing. About 3 weeks ago, Andy asked us to talk about Refresh. And of course, first I thought, oh dear goodness, no, that's a terrible idea. But of course I said yes, sure, of course. But it can't be that easy, so I picked a topic that I'd been interested in for a very long time, but knew virtually nothing about. And thought, hey, even though we're busy, the panic will force me to learn something new. This will be an exercise in how panic can transform a process. So I have three weeks to learn something new. Except Andy said, well, can we have 50 or 60 words like this afternoon about what you were talking about? Fine. So I sat down and wrote everything that I knew about the subject, which took precisely 5 minutes. Drew some lines, wrote some things, and tricked Kerr into saying that this sounded like a talk. And we wrote this. Auto partners, more than 0 of them, being nice and precise, will explore how biases and heuristics conspire to make us think that everyone else is stupid and that we're dead clever like. They'll explore whether it's possibly possible that other people are smarter than we think and discuss what we might do about that. And you read that, presumably, or maybe you didn't, and you still clicked that button, so here we are, we're in this together. This bears some resemblance to the talk that I'm going to give, and it will hold up to strict scrutiny as long as nobody knows anything about psychology, sociology, the human brain, as long as nobody has internet access right now, which I'm pretty sure you don't, and nobody can remember anything that I say for long enough to get home and check that that was true, or in this case, false. So it's a bit like a Malcolm Gladwell book in many respects. So if we're going to talk about heuristics, we should first of all talk about what a heuristic is. Heuristics are shortcuts that we use when time is more valuable than accuracy. So from the moment that we wake up in the morning to the moment we go to bed at night, we have thousands of tiny decisions to make. We don't have time to give those the kind of focus and attention that each decision kind of deserves. So we have these shortcuts. We have these fast decision-making techniques and rules of thumb that help us get through the day, and they work well for us. I mentioned Malcolm Gladwell because his book Blink was kind of hugely popular, and it was largely about how accurate heuristics can often be. Heuristics are very useful. They're necessary for us to function, and typically they are very good at helping us make good decisions in our life. So for example, if we get up in the morning and switch on BBC One and we get BBC Breakfast, in between human interest stories and inane tweets and pictures of cute cats, we might get some news. And we kind of look at the newsreader and we put our trust in the fact that the newsreader got this job, that the BBC are pretty good at journalism, and the fact that the newsreader has a nice suit and nice glasses. And we use these for shortcuts for the fact that they're credible. We put our trust in all of this kind of peripheral data, and we say, well, this person must know what they're talking about. And we believe most of what they say without question. Now, if a BBC newsreader says, hey, today's axe murdering day, let's all go out and do that, we'll probably question that. But otherwise, we'll just accept what they say is true. And that's very useful for us because we don't need to call into question every last thing. It'd be very costly. So you're probably familiar with experiments involving people in lab coats and or people in police uniforms that tell people to do things and they do them, and that can get you into all sorts of trouble. Because we use police uniforms and lab coats and things like that as shortcuts for authority as well. So that's the authority heuristic. Another common one is the scarcity heuristic. Now, this shows up quite a bit, obviously, but one of the places is when we're buying wine. If I go into the alcohol section in Tesco and I see that there are 100 of this type of wine, and if I don't really know the brands, if I don't really know the varietals and don't really know what I'm doing, which is true of most people most of the time, I'll see 100 of this type of wine left and 100 of this type of wine left, and I'll see one in the middle with 1 or 2 bottles left. And I'll say, oh, lots of clever people have been here before me and bought this one, so there's only one of these left, and so I'm going to pick that one. I'm going to use the scarcity of this wine as a shortcut for its quality. And that works fairly well, except that we all know that supermarkets know this stuff, and they're evil and trying to trick us. And so they can use the scarcity heuristic to trick us into buying that bottle of wine in the middle. Now there's another force at work here called the anchoring and adjustment heuristic, which is kind of, maybe a bit stronger in wine sales, where very often, to a reasonable approximation, most people buy wine by what's on offer. And there's a strange phenomenon that happens here, because we come in and we see, oh, this bottle of wine used to be £12 and now it's £6. And of course, our first thought is this bottle of wine used to be £12. And of course, it was never £12. Nobody really thinks that bottle was ever £12, or should have been £12 to begin with. It was £12 in some Tesco in Lewisham somewhere in the back for a week and a half, or however long the legal minimum is to be able to make that claim. But we kind of, even though that we know this is a trick, we still trust it, because how we make these decisions is that we anchor to the £12 number. And then anything that any new data or new thoughts, so whenever our logical mind kicks in and says, yeah, that's not really worth £12, we adjust that original theory. So we say, well, it's not worth £12, certainly not worth £6, so let's make a deal and say £9 or £10. And so first impressions really do count in that sense. I make a quick impression about something, and then I adjust that theory based on any new data that comes along. So this is a big one, the availability heuristic. This is one where we make decisions on the availability of data. I'm going to do a little bit of an experiment. Please do it with me, or I'll just be a guy at the front waving his arms around. Can we have a show of hands, please, for a couple of questions here? Quick answers. First, gut reaction. In the English language, are there more words beginning with the letter T or the letter K? Hands up for T. Hands up for K. Okay. Second question. Are there more words where the first letter is K or the third letter of a word is K? First and third. Okay, so you're all very smart people, and this is wonderful. Of course, there are more words beginning with T than there are K. And we kind of get that one pretty quickly, because we're really used to the frequency of the letter T in our language. We're used to that being a kind of a thing that we pick up. But the second question is a bit trickier, because typically how people, now, I think probably the room skewed towards third letter, and you're all wonderfully clever, because it's absolutely right. There are 3 times more words in the English language where K is the third letter than there are in the first. The problem, most people get this wrong, and the reason most people get this wrong is because of the availability heuristic, which is where whenever somebody asks that question, we start thinking of examples. We go to kites and kittens and knives, and we start and it's more actually the first time I did this, I wasn't going to tell this, but here we go. The first time I did this, I was like knife, kill, and Karis was like horrified. But anyway, okay, so. We use the availability of the kind of availability to mind of examples as a shortcut for relevance and truth in this case. A much better example is shark attacks. So shark attacks, whenever a shark attack happens, it makes it into the news. It makes it into the news everywhere. But falling airplane parts do not. So overwhelmingly more people are killed by airplane parts falling out of the sky and hitting people every year than shark attacks. But you don't really hear about those. Those don't really turn up in the paper. And so whenever we're standing in the sea, we're much more likely to get hit by, I don't know, undercarriage or something, than bitten by a shark. But we're never thinking, holy goodness, I'm really afraid of plane parts falling out of the sky, except perhaps now. And yeah, there are loads of examples of this one. So the availability to mind of shark examples is pretty high, especially from Jaws and things like that. And the availability of the plain part thing, very, very low. So we think, holy goodness, I don't get bitten by a shark. Another example of this one is local lottery winners. Whenever somebody, Maisie at the end of your road wins the lottery, it's in all the papers. It's everywhere. And so examples of people that you kind of vaguely know who've won the lottery are everywhere. People love talking about that. They don't write quite as frequently about people who play the lottery all the time and never win. That's rarely a newsworthy story. And so we kind of use this to skew our kind of how we perceive our chances of the lottery. And the lottery works pretty well. I believe they make some money because of that. Okay. One more of these. There's a common story that people tell, usually about smoking or food, but it goes something like this. My granddad had an Ulster fry every day, and he lived until he was 106. Well, that is a wonderful story, except that the home of the Ulster fry is the heart disease capital of the world. So it's possible that your granddad might be the exception to a bigger rule. And this kind of brings us on to another bias here, which is, it's called the confirmation bias, which is that the reason we tell ourselves stories like this, stories about, my granny smoked 100 a day and she was fine, and, my granddad, it's always granny and granddad, my granddad smoked or ate an Ulster fry every day, is because we want these stories to be true. I don't want to live in a world without Ulster fries, and so the nature of the universe is going to have to change so that I can continue to believe that they're not really that bad. This is the confirmation bias. We select data that confirms what we already believe, and we ignore data that calls into question what we already believe. We're really, really good at this. It's part of a bigger class that I'll not worry about, not least because I don't know very much about it, called motivated reasoning. So we believe what we want to believe, or we believe things that are convenient for us. So this is the first of a kind of a class of cognitive biases, which is kind of flowing out of motivated reasoning and flowing out of heuristics as well. These are basically logical flaws that come out of those phenomena. Okay, that was fairly heavy. There was a lot of theory, so we're gonna take a little bit of a break. I can't get video to work because I'm an idiot, so I'm gonna switch over and yeah, we're gonna watch a couple of minutes of video, and the only question is, what's happening here? Okay, so that was called the Hyder-Simul test, and I have a few questions. Okay, so what kind of person is the big triangle? Okay, anybody else? Okay, nice. Okay, cool. Yep, pretty good. What kind of person is the small triangle? Okay. And what kind of person is the circle? Okay, a 3-year-old, an independent 3-year-old. Okay, cool. Does anybody know why the two triangles fought? Okay. Why they fought? Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay. There's a bit of a slave thing going on. That's kind of creepy. Okay. And why did the circle go into the house? Okay. Okay. So I don't know the answer to any of these questions. Well, I mean, that's kind of the point. There are no answers to any of these questions. But what the experiment does really well, I think, is demonstrates how we project human emotions onto animate objects, onto any object really that moves like us. And there are loads of good reasons for this. So this is really, really helpful in evolutionary terms. It's really helpful for us to see things that move like us or things that move like animals as being worthy of our attention and worthy of kind of attributing character or attributing motive to. And kind of that's what I want to talk about. So what this demonstrates really well is that we kind of aim to attribute character to these animate objects, I guess. There are two types of attribution. One is situational attribution and one is dispositional attribution. The second one we'll probably deal with first, which is the one where we try and attribute character or disposition to one of these objects or to other people. This leads us on to there are a bunch of common concepts here, but one of the strongest I think is the fundamental attribution error. Now, this is where actually somebody did it really well. A bunch of you did it really, really well during this, which is that we're out driving and somebody cuts us off and we call them an asshole, or we now if we're out and somebody cuts us off, we call them an asshole. That's fine. If we're out and we're driving and we cut somebody off, well, it's not because we're assholes. We've got our reasons. I'm in a real hurry, or my son's sick in the back and we're going to, I don't know, the hospital. Why not? Or I just can't, afford the time to let you out right now, so I'm just going to do this. Sorry, you'll understand, fine. But when somebody else does it, that guy's an ass. I can't, why would somebody do that? What sort of person would do that? And this is a really big one. The fundamental attribution error is the one where I attribute somebody else's actions to their character. That's what I do. But I attribute my own actions to the situation I find myself in. I really favor myself whenever we do this. And actually, why psychologists think we do this is to do with a concept called focalism, where whenever I'm looking at you, I can see your whole person. I can see your whole self. And so whenever I see you doing something, I think, well, that's that person. That's his character or her character that is doing that thing. Whereas whenever I act, whenever I do something, the main thing that I see is my situation. I can't see very much of myself. And so I mainly focus on the situation that I'm in. And so I give myself the benefit of the doubt, and I call you an asshole. I should explain this illustration. So Heather and I were in the Swiss Alps a few years ago, and we were in this absolutely beautiful place. It's kind of the kind of place where I think they actually kind of shoot ads there and shoot, I don't know, let's say Toblerone ads, and things up this kind of glacial lakes and beautiful alpine Alps, and really, really beautiful place. And we were walking across this really narrow path, and what could be more idyllic in this beautiful, beautiful setting, sun shining, yay us, than a mountain fox. I don't know if that's a thing, but it was certainly a fox, and it was on a mountain, so it was lovely, and it was walking up towards us. And I was just soaking this all in and enjoying it, and all was well. But as we started to get closer and closer to the fox that was climbing this kind of sheer precipice, I started to tense up a little bit. And Heather asked what I was doing. And to my great shame, what I was actually doing was getting ready to kick the fox off a mountain. Because in my head, I had kind of come up with this scenario where this fox was rabid and it was going to bite one of us. And what happens when you get rabies is a reasonable approximation, you die. And so I had kind of got this into my head that if this fox came too close to myself or Heather, that I was going to have to kick it. And I really didn't want to kick it, but here we are. So, of course I didn't kick the fox. The fox stayed away, and it was all well. I told the story earlier, and they came away thinking that I had kicked the fox. I did not kick the fox. The point is, if I saw anybody ever kicking a fox, in fact, if I saw anybody squaring up to the point where they could conceivably kick the fox, I would think they are the biggest type of asshole. I would think I never want to meet that person, I never want to know that person, but it was perfectly acceptable in that situation for me to think, I'm going to get ready to kick this fox. So you might be asking, why on earth is he saying this at Refresh? And I think I've worked in a few agencies and with a few different design teams over the years, and I think there's kind of an insidious version of this phenomenon, which is that when we see other people's work, whenever we see the work coming out of each other's studio or each other's practices, we're so quick to judge. We're so quick to go, that is not great, and so those guys are stupid or lazy or what else did I have? Yeah, that'll do. And we attribute to people's characters, we attribute to the character of that team or the character of that designer what we see in the outcome. Whereas whenever something comes out of our studio, I know the situation, I know why it is as it is, and I know why, even though you might judge it, we think that this is the best possible answer to a given brief. We think this will work really well for a client, or whatever that is. I attribute the merits of our work to its situation, and the temptation is to attribute the merits of somebody else's work to kind of a fundamental, or their disposition or their character. In practice, this gets even worse because it stacks with the availability heuristic from earlier, which is that the availability of the expertise of my team is really, really high. So whenever, so we talk all the time about why we make the decisions that we make. We have Heather and Carousel explain all the time why they've done a thing a certain way, and that'll make all the sense in the world. And so the danger is, of course, that I think my team is, these people are the best in the world, and I don't have any availability of your thinking or the output or what happens in your studios, I think, and those guys don't have a clue what they're doing. Everyone I work with is exceptionally clever. So how are we getting on? We use flawed shortcuts. They're filtered through biases, but there's more, so let's keep going. Bounded rationality, yeah, you know it. This is largely attributed to some Israeli psychologists whose names I'm not going to try and pronounce. And the principle here is that so we're not God, no, we're just not. And we don't have all of the information available to make a decision in any given situation. And even if we did, we wouldn't be able to process huge amounts of information. So this is fairly common knowledge. We take a subset of the available information and we come to a decision based on that. There's nothing particularly new here, except that these people's work, let's give it a go. Tversky and Kahneman, their work suggests that actually our primary aim is coming to a decision that we can live with, rather than one that we kind of believe is rational, rather than trying to come to the most rational decision, even based on the data that we've collected. They came up with this horrible word, which is satisficing. But what it means is seeking satisfactory solutions rather than optimal ones. We need to believe that we're being rational, but we don't require ourselves to actually be rational. And as designers, this can get us into all sorts of trouble. The same processes that allow us to function and exist in the world can lead us to dramatically oversimplify complex problems. And it's not just designers, of course, everybody does this. So we use phrases like just need to, or why don't they just, and we pretend that very complex problems are actually very straightforward. Actually, maybe the worst one, I haven't got it here, but if you think about it is just poison. It usually means somebody hasn't thought about it at all. A really big topic at the minute, obviously, in America is gun control. And there are there's lots of stuff going on around banning guns and all sorts of things. There are, I don't think it's in any way surprising that this is a really complex problem. There are some very simple answers to this complex problem that don't quite stack up. So one thing, and my goodness, I hope it works, is that they're trying to limit gun sales at the minute, except there are 270 million guns in circulation in America already. And a lot of people that'll be very pissed off if they stop selling guns. And a lot of people that'll be even more pissed off if anybody ever tries to come and get their guns or find out how many guns they have. Now, I personally don't enjoy the thought of marauding people with lots of guns being pissed about anything. So stopping selling guns or taking guns off people, my goodness, I hope it works, but I'm not hopeful. What do I know? And that's kind of the point. Another kind of common thing that comes up is, hey, why don't we just make bullets really expensive? But which seems to be pretty good, except do we really want to live in a world where bullets are status symbols? Do we really want to live in a world where drug dealers who, at a certain level have some money, enjoy showing off how many bullets they can afford? Particularly in people, I guess. I don't. So, we invite, whenever we oversimplify problems like this, we invite in unintended consequences. Whenever everything that we try to change breaks something else, especially if we're careless when we think about it. So I talked about how my team are incredibly clever, and of course they are. But it would be very easy for our flavour of this to be, they should have just let us do it. This is a pretty popular thought, I think, in kind of what we do. I've heard this a lot. So, how are we doing? Well, we use flawed shortcuts, filtered through biases based on a subset of information that we're kind of loose about. So let's do one more of these. Our brains are our biographers. We're consistently taking in our world and processing things and making them fit in with what we already believe. Kind of covered that already. And when we're constructing a personal narrative, that needs to be internally consistent. And so when we hear or see something new, we explain it in the light of the stuff that we already know. You're probably familiar with the fact that in most people, the left side of the brain controls the right-hand side of the body. And the right-hand side of the brain is dominant in controlling the left-hand side of the body. So there were some really interesting experiments that went on in the 1950s where they didn't just go on, people actively sought to do them, but whenever people have extreme seizures because of epilepsy, sometimes a really extreme measure for that can be to sever the corpus callosum, which is the middle bit in your brain that connects the left and right. And they sever this almost all the way, and what that means is the left side of the brain can no longer communicate with the right side of the brain directly, most of the time. And so in these 1950s experiments in Caltech, they took patients of this procedure and they showed them an image just in their left eye. So in one case, the image was one of a frog, and they asked them what they'd seen. Now, the image goes in the patient, said the user, the image goes in the patient's left eye, into the right-hand side of their brain, but the right-hand side of their brain doesn't have a language center. The spokesperson for the body is in the left-hand side of the brain. It's going to get a bit technical. So the patient can't say what they've just seen. But the right-hand side of the brain can control the left hand and instruct the left hand to draw what it's just seen. So the image goes in the left eye, to the right brain, down the left arm, out as a drawing. The right eye then sees that drawing, and the patient says, oh, it's a frog. Now, this is kind of interesting, but the really interesting one for me is that when they show these patients kind of a horrendous scene, like a car crash or whatever, in their left eye, into the right brain, and no way of saying what this is. And what happens next is kind of strange, because the interviewer will then say, well, how are you feeling? And the patient will say, well, I'm actually feeling really bad, because they've started to sweat, or maybe their heart rate has gone up, whatever that is, and they're kind of starting to feel really bad. Why? Okay, why do you feel that way? Well, I've just been thinking a lot about my dad, and it's just really been getting me down, and I think I might be coming up. I might be having a flu. I might have the flu, and we start to. This is called confabulation, and we start to construct stories for why we feel how we feel based on the data that we have all the time. In this case, not knowing that it was actually the car crash that made you feel really bad to begin with. So, we don't. What does this teach us? Well, we don't really need our thoughts to mirror reality. We just need to be able to make sense of all of this stuff based on the data we have access to. But all of this is quite negative so far, and it shouldn't be, because I love designers. I fundamentally believe that if you can get smart people in a room with the right inputs, that they can change the world. So how might we be able to kind of fight against these biases? Well, let's try and tackle them one by one. We use flawed shortcuts, filtered through biases. We, based on a subset of information, meanwhile, we tell ourselves that we are awesome and right, and everybody else should just shut up. But we can obviously do something about this. So maybe our self-confidence is misplaced, but understanding this is great. This is a beginning. Say, for example, we assume that our first thoughts are wrong. Let's take an example of when we're talking to a client about a problem that they have. It's too easy to assume that we know the answer before they even stated the question properly. And fine, we might have the answer. We're experienced in what we do, whatever. But if we assume that our first thoughts are wrong, we adopt the responsibility of checking, and that's where things start to get interesting. If we're not sure that our gut is right, then we'll have to test it. We'll develop hypotheses, and we'll develop tests that either prove or disprove our hypotheses. I know that some of our best work has been full of uncertainty. It's been designed for uncertainty. We once saw a 30% increase in sales with a one-page redesign, because we went back to check whether our original theory was right about this. If you work on the web, you probably have similar stories. But it's very easy to see that science, that kind of confuse science and expertise and things like this, because what our clients often want from us is to already have all of the answers. And that's fine, but science is about being able to form good questions and being open to being wrong. So our expertise just helps us start with better hypotheses. When we assume that we're always right, and that everything we make is great, and that the world will love and connect with whatever we put out, the work suffers. But when we start from a position of humility and consider what others need from us, our primary goal becomes making something of genuine value. Making work that gives a lot and assumes little helps us make work that's of worth to humans. We were on a meeting last week with a long-term client that has seen a lot of success over the last few years. And a big theme of that meeting was that we worked so hard to earn our first 100 users a few years ago. We worked our asses off of that. And now that there are hundreds of thousands of users, there's a danger of being complacent. And so the tone of that meeting completely changed when it turned to, how do we work as hard for the next 100 users as we did for those first 100 users? If we keep asking that question for every 100 users, we'll keep making work that somebody loves, because we'll be trying to connect with them. This slide used to say that people are clever, but as you can tell, I'm quite the nerd, and this is more precise. So people are on average of average intelligence. And the fundamental attribution error, as we talked about, and the availability heuristic will tell you otherwise, but these aren't reliable. One thing we know is true, people are cleverer than we tend to give them credit for. It's so easy to assume that clients, we're going to do this, are a pain because they don't understand what we do. So we apply the fundamental attribution error, and it's really easy to think that, that thought's stupid, I'm just going to ignore it. But sometimes a request like, make the logo bigger, is a cry for help. It's someone who doesn't have the language to articulate their real need or their real concern. So maybe it's somebody saying, I'm afraid that my company won't get credit for this, or that this piece of work won't properly do its job. It's the beginning of a conversation about their hopes and fears, getting a bit touchy-feely, and also about how to make sure that we do our jobs well for them. Often use design principles like don't make me think can trick designers into treating users like they're stupid. But this comes back to humility. If we come to our work from a point of view of humility, we'll do all that we can to help users. I find it helpful to use this, to think of users as smart but busy. If that's the case, it's my job to help them and maybe brighten up their day a wee bit too. I hope that, I know that whenever I approach work from this mindset, I make better work. And finally, listen well. Clyde Christensen from Harvard Business School says that question is a place in the mind where answers fit. I think that's really interesting. We talk a lot about empathy in design these days, but so often what we mean by empathy in design is kind of thinking really hard and pretending that we're the user. And that can be a really real value. It's a really, really good start. But if our brains are biased, we're going to have to work harder. Maybe part of the answer is finding ways of listening that really get to the needs of users. And when we've done this well, it's worked. So a while back, we were designing an app for medical practice. And I went and had a bunch of the tests done as a patient. And it wasn't really because I wanted to understand the flow and the processes, though that was obviously important, the medical practice. But I wanted to understand what it felt like to be in that chair. It was actually really scary. It was surprisingly scary. And on the basis of that, our team made some design decisions that would help reassure the poor beggars that would have to sit in that chair after us. We've gone to Burma with clients. We've gone to Maker Faire in California with clients, not least because we wanted to, but also because we believe that the extent to which we can understand their worlds is the extent to which we can design well for them. And recently, I don't know if you've been getting into this, but we started doing jobs to be done interviews, which is an interviewing technique that really kind of gets deep down into how people act, how people make decisions, whether they're purchase decisions or decisions to change something. These new ways of listening kind of help us get closer to the truth, help us get closer to what it's like to be somebody who has to use this thing every day. So, these are some of my initial responses to what I've learned over the last few weeks. And if I've learned anything from this process, these thoughts aren't to be trusted. But being mindful of biases and heuristics is already making me a better designer, so I'm happy enough. Thank you very much.